Leslie cabinets were originally designed for the electronic Hammond organ, taking the sound and swishing it about with spinning wheels. But no one had thought of putting a voice through it before. Radical idea number 4.
And radical idea number 5 was the McCartney-led use of tape loops running on a chain of 5 additional machines mixed live onto the master track. The Beatles were deep in uncharted waters, not just for pop, but for any kind of music. They took what they learnt from Tomorrow Never Knows and applied aspects of it, especially the reverse tape effects, to many of their other songs, particularly John Lennon's masterly Strawberry Fields Forever.
Hello, welcome to bonus episode number 12 of Glass Onion on John Lennon. And what you just heard there was the wonderful Howard Goodall. There's a documentary series called 20th Century Greats, and that was an episode on the Beatles. He's obviously talking about Tomorrow Never Knows there, which will feature in today's episode. And Howard Goodall gets a mention as the composer of the theme music to Blackadder. I don't know if that's a kind of a millstone that he got stuck with, but he's done loads of other things as well. And as well as the Beatles documentary. In fact, there's another one on Sgt. Pepper, which I'm sure you can find somewhere. And then he did one on the history of music. So yeah, highly recommend his work. So this episode is a little bit different. It's a 2-part episode, and it was actually recorded way back in November 2013. So that was a time when I was already well into podcasts, as in listening to podcasts. But the only Beatles ones around that I knew of were Fab Four, Free for All, and Things We Said Today. Something about the Beatles may have started, but I don't think I was aware of it at that point. 2013 was the first time I started recording anything resembling a podcast. It actually started on New Year's Day 2013. I recorded a conversation with my friend Ian Hargest, who's a school friend of mine. You're going to hear from another school friend as well later on in the episode. And we recorded a conversation about our lives. And I kind of liked it, and I thought, well, yes, podcasting, I should get into that. But I procrastinated like mad, and of course didn't start Glass Onion until 2019. And interestingly, you'll hear me say that I'm going to be starting a more political podcast. And although I don't consider it a politics podcast, Life and Life Only certainly deals with the issue of how the world works and indeed how we function. So I already had that in mind back then. It just took me a few years to get going with that. So the first half I've called Reflections on the Beatles, or Beatles Reflections, one of those. People's Front of Judea or Judean People's Front. Yeah, in the end it's the same. And this is 8 years ago. It's an interesting time capsule for me anyway. And I solicited questions from friends via social media, I think, or email. But the nice thing is that I included a few music clips, which I don't really do on Glass Onion, as in the recorded versions of songs. So you hear like little snatches of different songs, and there is a purpose to show the very rapid development of the Beatles. The questions and the topics, it might seem a bit like Beatles 101 now, but it's also interesting to think back to that time because it was before the big wave of Beatles podcasts and Beatles books. I mean, it's just an incredible time. Obviously, there have been thousands of books already, but I really feel like the recent amazingly fertile period of Beatles research hadn't quite started. Also, interestingly, I mentioned more than once Tune In, Mark Lewisohn's book that came out in 2013, but I hadn't read it at that point. I'm actually going to talk about that in the outro, so you'll have to hang on for that one. But I talk about the book, and that really changed everything, because you'll hear me say, I'm spoiling everything as usual, but you'll hear me say, oh, you know, I've read every book worth reading. Or I was actually at a point, I'll be honest, because I can remember it, where I was thinking, I know everything worth knowing about the Beatles, and little did I know what was around the corner, you know, from books and podcasts. So that's the first half. And then the second half is a discussion. I think I'm calling it a tangential review of Revolver, because we do go through the Revolver songs, although I think there seemed to be some sort of cut in the recording, because you don't hear much about I'm Only Sleeping for some reason. But we talk about all the other songs. And it's a talk with another school friend, Edmund Holliday. He and I have a good rapport, and we really enjoyed it. And this was pretty much, I mean, these two that you're going to hear today were pretty much my first 2 podcasts, although they didn't go out as podcasts. I think I just put them on YouTube or something like that, and obviously had to cut the music, but you'll hear lots of music clips and other audio clips, so I think you'll really enjoy this. The sound quality is a bit lo-fi. I had to do quite a bit of work to remove the hiss, and I've sort of cleaned it up a little bit. It doesn't sound too bad. It seems to vary between the different recordings, but anyway, you'll be able to hear what we're talking about, and it sounds okay. So I will let you get on with listening, and I'll be back on the other side with a few words. Enjoy. I'm just going to be talking about a few things, and I actually asked a few friends to come up with interesting topics, and they came up with a few sort of wind-ups as well, but there you go. So, the Beatles, I think, like them or not, and not everybody likes the Beatles, let's face it. Heavy metal fans, for example, would consider them way too poppy. The punks in the mid to late 70s didn't like the Beatles. In fact, there was a rumour that Glenn Matlock of the Sex Pistols got sacked because he liked the Beatles. I don't know if that was the only reason, but they're not liked by everybody, but I don't think you can really argue with over 1 billion albums sold, which is what's estimated to be the number of units, singles and LPs, CDs, etc. that have been sold. And Beatles albums, you'll never find them in bargain bins. I mean, even well-known bands like Rolling Stones and The Who, for example, you will probably find some of their albums in what used to be called the bargain bins, for knockdown prices. But Beatles albums, to my knowledge, have sold full price pretty much ever since the band split. And of course, the glorious thing about the band is that they split when they were still good. They were still relevant in 1969 when they actually split up. Officially 1970, but the last time they actually were in Abbey Road Studios was 1969 in August. Now, the sheer output of the band is quite incredible. I mean, it is partly a reflection of the time, because albums did used to come out a lot quicker. Lots of bands would make at least 1 album, and usually 2 albums. I think Creedence Clearwater Revival actually made 4 in 1969. I'm pretty sure about that. But there you go. But the Beatles generally made either 1 or 2 albums. I think later on, when they spent a lot more time recording their albums, they would generally bring out 1. But the first 3 years, which was 63, 64 and 65, they brought out 2 albums and 3 singles. It was all very made to order, which makes it all even more impressive for me, that it was all done under immense time pressure. There is actually a book written by what I would call the number 1 Beatles expert, called Mark Lewisohn, and the book is called Complete Beatles Chronicle. He also wrote another book which I would highly recommend, which is the Complete Beatles Recording Sessions, which details everything that was recorded on every day that they were in Abbey Road Studios. And the other remarkable thing is all their output really happened over 7 years. They first entered Abbey Road Studios in North London in June 62, and as I said, the last time they ever recorded together as a foursome was August 69, so it's pretty much 7 years. But Mark Lewisohn's book, The Complete Beatles Chronicle, basically tells you what they did on every day from, I think, the mid-50s actually, from when they were the Quarrymen, which was the original band, and 63 and 64, it was just unbelievable how much they did, as well as albums, singles which weren't on albums, which were expected to be popular and expected to sell millions, and they usually did. They also did radio, they did TV, they did tours. They were just constantly on the go. Unbelievable. And then they slowed down gradually, and basically from the middle of August, I might talk about 1966 later because it was a massively pivotal year. From 66, they took a 3 or 4 month sabbatical. I mean, they weren't doing nothing. They were all involved in activities. Then they all came back with matching Zapata moustaches. I mean, some people think they actually came back without realising that the others had all grown moustaches. Others say that they just decided it was a deliberate image change for the band. So they entered the psychedelic period in 66, 67, which is probably my favourite period of the band. And then 68, 69, I wouldn't say it was necessarily downhill. They were still producing amazing music. But they went basically back to the rock and roll, and they made the White Album in 68, and then Let It Be was recorded at the beginning of 69, but not released until 1970, and then they made Abbey Road, which was the last album they actually made together, although it wasn't the last one released. Now, I was born in 1975, so I basically grew up in the 80s, and the first period of music that I ever was into was around probably 1983, 84. Now, those in England of a certain age will probably know bands such as Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, Culture Club, Tears for Fears, and I've listened to their music a bit recently. It's not bad music, but the way it was presented, it was the new romantic period, which is not one of my favourite periods of music. But there was a certain style in the 80s that I find a little bit self-conscious. And basically what happened, I was going along very nicely, going to the Radio 1 Road show, keep that one quiet, and happily listening to me 80s music. And then in about 1988 or 89, my sister came with this record called A Collection of Beatles Oldies But Goldies. And it was actually a compilation that came out for Christmas '66. And the reason it came out was because the Beatles didn't release an album of originals that Christmas. They were working on Sgt. Pepper, or Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, then Sgt. Pepper. So they brought out this compilation. And I remember my sister gave me this record, and the front cover was quite a nice shot, sort of an animated drawing of the Beatles with a sort of Carnaby Street gear on. And the back cover was a picture of them taken in Japan. And the album was a compilation of their songs from 63 to 66. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to play you a fairly typical song from the 80s, followed by one of the songs from this album. Now, in the 80s, when I used to collect albums, they generally always had the running times for each song. And songs were generally 4.5 minutes, and they tended to fade in quite gradually and then have quite long fade outs. So here's just a typical song from the 80s.
Who's gonna tell you things aren't so great? You can't go on thinking nothing's wrong. Who's gonna drive you home tonight?
That was a song called Drive by The Cars. Pretty good song. And then here's a song from the Beatles album. A lot of you might prefer the first song actually, but that song's got a lot of punch, and that's what really stuck out from this album. And also, this album had all the running times on it as well, and that song was about 2 minutes 10. Some of the songs, Paul McCartney's most famous song probably ever, Yesterday, which has been covered by 2,000 different artists. It's exactly 2 minutes long, so it was pretty exciting listening to this music. And then even within the album, within the span of 3 years, the development of the band was quite remarkable. And I'm going to play you bits of 2 more songs from the Beatles, 2 songs from that album, and just listen to the contrast. This is in 3 years. So that was I Wanna Hold Your Hand from 1963, and then of course Strawberry Fields Forever. And again, look at the contrast. They're just a beat band in 1963, making very, very catchy music. And commercially, I would say the best band, but maybe I'm a bit biased. But the sophistication, what's happened in those 3 years, quite remarkable. You've got, that last instrument you heard playing that scale is called a swarmandela, and it actually comes from India. George went to India while they were having this sabbatical that I was talking about in the autumn of 66. So amazing progression. And the voice, John Lennon hated his voice, and he used to tell George Martin, do something to my voice, smother it with tomato ketchup, do anything so I don't have to sing in a natural, I don't have to hear my natural voice. Although a lot of people would say he had a great natural voice, but certainly what was done to the voice gave it a certain character as well. I probably don't need to go through the history of the band. I think most people would know that they emerged. Well, John Lennon met Paul McCartney in 1957 at a village fete, an incredibly innocuous occasion. John Lennon already had a band called the Quarrymen because he went to Quarrybank School. They had a mutual friend, and Paul McCartney came to this fete to watch the band, and he heard them for the first time. Now, by some miracle, in the 90s, it was actually found that someone had recorded, a fellow called Molyneux, had actually recorded some of this concert. Now, I do remember when this was announced, couple of things that crossed my mind. I think, well, how did this guy forget about it? First of all, surely, a few years after he recorded it, when they became famous, he would have remembered that he recorded them, or maybe he lost the tape or thought he'd recorded over it. But anyway, it's not of high quality, it's really just of historical value. But the fact that it existed is quite remarkable, isn't it? For me, there's only two possible ways that I would look at this. Number one, it could be a fake, but I think someone would have rumbled Mr. Molyneux. So I think it is genuine, and it's almost supernatural in a way how this happened to be recorded. Because, it was a very, very innocuous situation. I mean, not that many people would record a band at a village fete in 2013 with all the technology we've got now. I suppose there would be someone with a camera phone. But, to do that in 1957 and for it to appear 37 years later was quite strange. And then the band emerged to the world in 1963 in England, so 6 years after that fate, and then 64 in America. They toured until 66, got fed up of it because they were making songs like Eleanor Rigby, which you heard before, couldn't possibly reproduce it live. And so they almost had a double life, a bit like the early Pink Floyd. They were playing experimental music and recording experimental music and then having to go out on the road and play songs that they'd outgrown, even if they'd only recorded them 2 or even 1 year earlier. I mean, if you think of them, again, recording Eleanor Rigby, then something like Hard Day's Night, which was 2 years before Eleanor Rigby, would have seemed already old hat to them. So they were around till 69, as I said. They conquered the world in a pretty short time. Now, I'm going to go through some of the suggestions that friends and acquaintances have made. I did ask for ones other than the obvious, but someone wrote down the haircuts. I think that might have been a bit of a joke. LSD, another suggestion. There's actually 3 drugs which were very prevalent at different stages of the Beatles' career, and they really were reflected in the music. That's the thing about the Beatles. They didn't just sort of get drunk or smoke weed or, it all contributed, maybe not alcohol, but drugs. Certainly, it contributed to making them what they were. And the first one was speed, which is amphetamines. And they first took this in Hamburg. They used to play 6 to 8 hours a night. And this film, Backbeat, depicts quite well that they're completely exhausted. And they say, we can't play anymore. And a waiter gives them these things called preludine. Prellies, they used to call them. And they're basically speed pills rather than powder. And in the films depicted very well. They're absolutely wired, manic eyes, and obviously can't sleep after they've taken it. But if you listen to some of their early records, it's never been officially said that they used to take speed when they became the lovable Mop Tops in 63. But I would bet that they probably were. And I think John Lennon said he was. He liked to confess. He was sort of the opposite. He probably exaggerated what you would consider as negative points in interviews rather than most people try and accentuate the positive. The Beatles' music, it's very instant. It's quite speedy in a way because it's just there and it never lets up. The songs I played earlier in Hard Day's Night, Can't Buy Me Love, I Feel Fine's a little bit more relaxed. I think I Feel Fine was the first single that came out after they started smoking pot. So the music slowed down a bit towards the end of 64. When the Beatles were on their first main tour of America, they met Bob Dylan for the first time. I think it was actually August. And there was a DJ called, journalist called Al Aronowitz, who was a friend of Dylan's. He arranged the meeting, and Dylan came to their hotel, which was a Delmonico in New York. And I think the Beatles were drinking Scotch and Coke at that time, and Dylan pulled out a skinny little joint. Now in America, people generally smoke weed without tobacco, so they generally smoke these skinny little joints. Anyway, Dylan pulled out a joint, and the story goes he gave it to John Lennon, who was a bit nervous, gave it to Ringo, and Ringo smoked the whole thing and collapsed in a heap, laughing. They all smoked together, and they had a wonderful time. There's a film that came out, made by Todd Haynes, called I'm Not There. It was all about Dylan. It's 6 different actors. Particularly memorable was Kate Blanchett as the mid-60s Dylan. And there's a great scene of Dylan and the Beatles, and I think the film's speeded up, and they kind of look a bit like, I don't know, Chaplin almost. It's sort of, they're running around looking like a fivesome rather than a group of 4 and Dylan. And in the film it looks like they've probably just been smoking. On this famous occasion, they all got stoned, including Brian Epstein. And Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, was a very sort of well-groomed man, always looked immaculately dressed. And he was of the upper middle class. And the memory that Paul had was of Brian Epstein smoking a little fag end, a little bit of a joint, and looking in the mirror and pointing at himself, going, "Chew, chew." So he lost his inhibitions. And by all accounts, they all got on very well that night. But that was the second big change for the Beatles in terms of drugs influence their music. And I think Rubber Soul, which came out in '65, and Help as well, they both reflected this. There was an expansion of awareness. And as I said, it wasn't just about getting stoned. They used it in their music. And then we get to the lysergic acid, LSD, which was actually legal when John Lennon and George Harrison first took it. They were spiked by a dentist in London. They were there with their wives. And suddenly they were on an LSD trip. This is in '65. Apparently George Harrison said he ended up driving them later on. Probably not a good idea to drive at all on LSD. He was driving at something like 14 miles an hour or something like that. And then they went to a club, and all kinds of things were happening. There was a red light in the elevator going up to the club, and they all thought it was on fire, as well as the sort of visuals and the freakiness. Again, it's a very profound experience. And I want to just talk briefly about the dynamics of the Beatles, because if you said to someone, who do you think were the closest members of the Beatles, you'd probably automatically think of John and Paul, because of all the time they spent songwriting and being the leaders of the band. But in my opinion, definitely John Lennon and George Harrison had the closest relationship. George Harrison always looked up to John Lennon as a sort of older brother. He used to follow him around when they were teenagers in Liverpool. He was about 3 years younger, George was. And I think after they took LSD together, it really cemented their deep relationship. They were the most passionate, I think, about meditation in '68 when they went to India. And they stayed the longest as well. So they were really soulmates. Paul and Ringo were more showbiz people. They liked all the stuff. Ringo said he liked the decoy cars and the disguises and all that. I don't think John and George liked that at all. I think they were the ones who wanted to stop touring more than the other two. So LSD entered their lives, and I guess Sgt. Pepper, but also Revolver, would be considered the LSD albums. What does LSD do to a person? What does it do to the music? Well, LSD changes perception. George Harrison put it very well. He said, marijuana is like having a couple of beers. LSD is like going to the moon. And it's frightening if you take too much of it, as there have been cases over the years of people doing that. But it changes perceptions, and it expands everything. It makes everything more profound, and it gives you a deeper understanding if you're looking for it. If you're looking to just laugh for 6 hours, I'm sure you could happily do that. But if you're the kind of person who does look a bit deeper at things and is looking for some sort of expanded consciousness and awareness, then LSD will do that for you. John Lennon is reputed to have had something like 1,000 trips. Now again, that may be a bit of an exaggeration, but there was a time in '67 when he seemed to be just tripping almost every day. There was one occasion he took it in the studio when they were recording Getting Better. They were doing the backing vocals, or the vocals, I think. And John Lennon apparently in his pocket, in his jacket, he had little compartments, up was here, down was here, weed here, cocaine, whatever he was doing. And he just took the wrong one, and he meant to take some speed, and he ended up taking LSD. Now, in a book called The Lives of John Lennon by Albert Goldman, very controversial book which came out after John Lennon had died. Goldman had written a book about Elvis before, very trashy, and was considered a bit of a character assassination. He did make one quite astute observation, which was that John Lennon may have freaked out because in the song Getting Better, there's a line, I used to be cruel to my woman, I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved. And that was, I think, a line that was written by John Lennon. And John Lennon did say that he had struck women before. So maybe that pushed him over the edge, because the other thing with drugs in general, but particularly LSD, it's not the environment you want to be in when something negative comes into your mind, because it's obviously going to be heightened a lot. Same with the positive. So, it's a bit of a gamble. And he took it, I would say probably at least 200, 300 times, maybe not 1,000. He said, I just used to eat it. And if you look at some pictures, actually, if you go to Google Images and you put in John Lennon, Sgt. Pepper, or John Lennon 1967, it is quite strange to see the pictures of him during the sessions for Pepper. He looks remarkably different. If you take a picture of him in 66 and then 1 year later in 67, the difference is quite remarkable. I mean, he looks 30 years older. Someone described him as looking like a Victorian watchmaker. If you look at the photos, he's got granny glasses, he's got this Zapata moustache, and he just looks very haggard and he looks ill. So I think he did too much of it, and there have been other famous acid casualties. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys reputedly did too much of it and had a nervous breakdown and wasn't able to tour with the band anymore. Sid Barrett, you probably know about, who was believed now to have been already schizophrenic. I couldn't blame it completely on acid, but I think he overindulged as well. There is a bit of dispute about that, but I think clearly he did do a lot of acid. He actually recorded himself on an acid trip. Okay, so that's LSD. Timothy Leary. Around the same period, Timothy Leary was a Harvard professor. I believe he was sacked from Harvard, or he may have walked out. He used to dress very conservatively. He's actually almost a mirror of what happened to the beautiful people in the 66 and 67. He was a Harvard professor who discovered LSD and discovered another way of looking at things. Possibly realised that at Harvard he was being restricted, even though it was a very prestigious position he had. So he started to dress differently, grew his hair, had a ponytail, started to wear not too many clothes. And I think his connection to the Beatles, he actually said that they were mystical beings sent on this earth to, I don't remember what it was, to wake up the masses perhaps, to enlighten everybody. And think about that, in 63 when the Beatles came out, they were just kids with bowl cuts singing this mindless music about I love you, you love me, from me to you, please please me. And within 4 years they're considered to be super beings of a kind. Leary actually also was at the hotel in which John Lennon and Yoko Ono recorded Give Peace a Chance, John Lennon's famous peace anthem. Leary was there. Leary died, I think, in the 90s or the early 21st century, and his ashes were reportedly sent into space, which was quite fitting for him. He was quite a significant character, probably not taken very seriously nowadays, but his famous phrase was turn on, tune in, drop out. He was very against education. I believe that education and religion were the biggest narcotic of all. I'll probably give my opinion on that on my other podcast, the political one, not the Beatles. But a very colourful character. The bigger than Jesus scandal. The basic story being that John Lennon in 65 and 66 was, according to the journalist who interviewed him, the laziest man in England. He used to smoke a lot of weed, he used to watch a lot of TV, he used to hibernate basically in between the tours. He's very, very disillusioned. This life of being a Beatle obviously wasn't fulfilling him. And he would have journalists come over to his house to interview him if they wanted to interview him. He wasn't going to go out if he didn't need to. They weren't recording or touring. And I imagine he would smoke weed and then just let his mind go where it wanted, and stuff would come out of his mouth. So he talked about Jesus and the disciples, and he actually said Jesus was all right. It's the disciples that ruin it. I'm right and I'll be proved right. We're bigger than Jesus. Now what he actually meant was, come on churches, the Beatles are bigger than you now. Sort it out. It wasn't we're bigger than Jesus. And this is the problem obviously with the written word. How many emails have you sent or been received and you've perhaps misunderstood the tone of the person who's writing to you? And this is really what happened. I mean, he said we're bigger than Jesus. The ultra-Christian Bible Belt, as they call it in America, banned their music. They were burning, not the Beatles, but they were burning their records. And, really putting out a lot of propaganda, saying the Beatles were bad and evil. How dare they, etc. John Lennon had to make a rather fawning apology, which was not his style at all. He didn't really make a full apology. He did say sorry, but it was all cloaked in a kind of, I'm sorry for what you think I said. Which, fair play to him, he didn't give in. He wasn't a man for compromising generally. Okay, the last subject I'm going to talk about, primal therapy. Primal scream therapy. Now, if you say primal scream to anybody, someone in their 20s or a teenager, they would probably immediately think of the band Primal Scream, Bobby Gillespie's band. That band did actually take their name from a book which is called The Primal Scream by Arthur Janoff, and this book was posted to John Lennon, arrived in the mail. John Lennon read it and was in tears apparently after he read it, and thought that he'd maybe discovered the answer. Because I think to start the story you have to really go back to John Lennon's childhood. His father was a merchant seaman called Freddie Lennon, and he was absent. Now some say he walked out, some say he was away trying to earn money, some say he was just a typical type of a sailor. He belonged at sea. So he was away and John Lennon was raised. His mother was around, but his auntie, Mimi, Mary Elizabeth Smith, I think he had contact with his mother, and then his father came back and took him to Blackpool for the day. They had a wonderful day, father and son. The mother was horrified, thinking that Freddie Lennon had kidnapped his son. So there was apparently because this is disputed by a very recent book that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But there was some sort of scene and he had to choose between his mother and father. And in the end he chose his mother, and he was quite haunted by that. A 5-year-old having to make this kind of choice. Why can't you have both your parents? Why have you got to choose one or the other? So John Lennon was a troubled man, there's no doubt about it. He was really a manic depressive. I mean, he was undiagnosed bipolar, in my opinion. In the opinion of Bob Spitz, who wrote a 900-page Beatles biography 7 or 8 years ago. So John Lennon was always looking for something to cure his angst. He thought fame might have been it, he thought drugs might have been it, he thought meditation might have been it, the Maharishi. And then obviously when he read this book he thought that maybe primal therapy was the thing. Now primal therapy is basically a therapy where the patient recreates a moment of trauma. The book was called The Primal Scream because a lot of times when a patient is reliving this traumatic experience, they will start screaming, and essentially screaming out. We talk about having a good cry, to release all your stress and tension. If you magnify that, multiply that, 10 times or whatever, you're screaming out this horrible neurosis. And I've actually read The Primal Scream, and it's a heavy book. It's a bit of a scary book to read because it really reveals the neurosis which is in everyone. Rather like my other sort of section of my podcasts and videos, which is more to do with the truth politically. You have to think about it, do I want to know the truth about the world? Do I want to know the truth about myself and my neurosis? Or do I want to be just consider myself normal? Anyway, John Lennon started a course of primal therapy, as did Yoko Ono, who also had a lot of childhood issues, they would call them now. And they did a course of therapy in Ascot, where they were living, in a massive house called Tittenhouse Park. And then they went to LA as well. But I think what happened was John and Yoko were going through a lot of other things. They'd been withdrawing from heroin, which produced the song Cold Turkey. Very, very powerful song. Great song. And I think what happened was that they weren't able to finish the course of therapy. Yoko Ono's previous husband, her second husband, Tony Cox, they'd had a baby together called Kyoko. And Tony Cox had run away with Kyoko. And I think John and Yoko had to put their attention on trying to sort that out and trying to find Kyoko. So they weren't able to finish the primal therapy. And in Arthur Janoff's words, if you half finish the course of therapy, you open up the wounds, but you don't resolve them. So John Lennon certainly would have done some heavy-duty therapy, and his first album,
first proper solo album, which is called John Lennon Plastic Ono Band from 1970, is an amazing statement. They did a classic albums series, did an episode on that album. It's very unique. I mean, it's just laying himself bare, all the pain on a record and still managing to make it pretty commercial as well. It's got some amazing songs: Mother, Working Class Hero, God, a song called Well, 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 which is not a very famous song, which I really like, Love. Ringo did all the drumming on the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band. Listen to that album. Ringo's not a technical genius. He never said he was. He's a very effective drummer. So the Primal Therapy was another thing that he didn't quite finish. He opened up his wounds. His father came back into his life. He came back first at the height of the Beatles, and then he reappeared again in 1970, and John Lennon had gone through Primal Therapy and apparently screamed at him and chucked him out of his house, and all the angst was released on his father, basically. So that was Primal Therapy. I'm just going to talk about one thing before I finish. There's lots of Beatle books. On my blog, I'm planning to do a short guide to what I would consider the best Beatles books, because there are so many, there's hundreds of books. Mark Lewisohn, who I mentioned earlier, as writing Complete Beatles Recording Sessions and Complete Beatles Chronicle, two very good books, has actually been working on his own biography, and he's been working 10 years, the first book of 3. The first part has just come out. It came out last month, and it's called Tune In. Now, you don't have to be a genius to guess that the other 2 parts are going to be called Turn On and Drop Out, referencing back to Timothy Leary, who we were talking about earlier. And what's staggering about this book is that it's actually 1,000 pages, and it's the first part of 3. And what's even more staggering is that there's an author's cut, which is the literal version of a director's cut on a DVD. An author's cut, get this, 2,000 pages, and it's part 1, so there could be up to 6,000 pages of this biography if you take the uncut version, the author's cut. Now, I've read pretty much everything that is worth reading on the Beatles, so I'm going to read the official version, and I suppose I'm going to have to read the author's cut version as well, because the author's cut version is going to be the official version plus, but it's not going to be separated out. You're going to have to either read one or the other. Otherwise, you're essentially reading the official version twice. But he said that he has found out some staggering information. So I really would like to read the book and then do another podcast. There is a podcast that's already come out, which is a regular one, called the Fab 4 Free for All, which you can find on iTunes. And they've actually interviewed Mark Lewisohn since the first book has come out, so that will give you some idea. But I think he's going to be smashing a few myths here and there. Right, that's it. I can't talk anymore. I've had enough. If you'd like to give me some feedback, this is going to appear as a YouTube video and hopefully as a podcast. I would really appreciate feedback and more ideas, because I'd like to do this again, possibly with somebody else to share the workload. If you'd like to ask me a question or suggest a talking point to do with the Beatles. The only one I was going to talk about, which I haven't, which I'll do later, is sort of the band dynamics, how they functioned as a band and in the studio and on the road as well. But that's it for this time, and it just remains for me to say...
Wonder how you managed to make ends meet. Lady Madonna.
I'm only 16 years old, so I've just got grey hair already. I've just got an old-sounding voice, you see. I had a few problems with the copyrights. YouTube got rid of my video within about, I think it was about 4 seconds of uploading it. And if I get 3 strikes, I'm banned forever. I can't make any more videos. And I think I'm going to face the YouTube firing squad.
You're going to get 25 years if you're in California. But
25 years.
You're in Kent, so you're all right.
Right, okay, this is Antony, and I'm with my friend Edmund, and he's supping his tea, so he's happy. So we're just going to talk Beatles, basically. I've actually already done a recording. Some of the stuff I talked about last time, I asked some people to come up with ideas. Imelda Marcos, LSD, Ringo, tortured genius, ? Paul is dead. Now, I did have a request from my friend Peter, who's one of my favourite Welshmen. and he wants me to go through Revolver. So we're going to do that. We're going to go through a few songs and talk about them. Won't be able to play them, but hey, maybe we can sing a few bars. Right, Edmund, we've known each other since school, and we used to listen to the Beatles. When was the first time you listened to their music?
I think it was in France, I think, when my family was on holiday, and my parents, I think they were just on sale somewhere, and they just put the singles and everything on tape, and then there was Sgt. Pepper, and I think I got the singles one first, the later one with Hello, Goodbye on it.
Yeah, that's it.
With them looking down from above.
Well, that's exactly the same shot as one for Please Please Me.
Right, yes, that's right,
the same shot.
I remember that, because they were young, and then John's got the beard.
That's it. And they just look like four completely different people.
They do, yeah.
I thought, yeah.
Let's do that. John particularly, he looks like he's just changed completely.
Well, he looked like Jesus, really.
He does, yeah. Some guru or something, yeah.
No, but I do remember, because they brought out these red and blue albums in early 70s.
Yeah.
And the red albums is 62 to 66, and the blue album 67 to 70. And the difference in the music, I mean, the last time I did a recording, I played, I think it was From Me to You, or Wanna Hold Your Hand, followed by Strawberry Fields, or From Me to You, followed by Eleanor Rigby. And you're talking about like 3 years difference. And the difference is just unbelievable. Like, you're just going from 3 or 4 chords, very kind of bouncy sound, to this kind of weird backwards tapes, psychedelia, mellotrons. You know, and visually, if you look at these pictures, you're talking about just the span of a few years. They just look like completely different people.
I think they were different. They'd been changed by that.
Yeah.
Who wasn't going to be changed by that?
Yeah, absolutely.
But musically, they changed a lot. Yeah. I don't like the early Beatles as much as
you're
the later.
You're not so into it, right?
But I remember that Strawberry Fields. That was the one that really, really impressed me. Even knowing what music, having grown up with music after that. You know, it still sounded impressive, still sounded so original.
It's so weird as well.
It's very weird.
It's very strange.
I didn't like probably the weirdness. It was at the end of it. It was probably too weird, even because I was like 11.
It's quite haunting. Yeah, I was quite scared by that.
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to Revolution 9?
Yes, I have. That's very...
Yeah, I think that's... I know a lot of people hate that.
I don't like... Was it Wild Honey Pie as well? I think it's a failure. But
that was Paul, actually.
Was it Paul, yeah?
Yeah. Paul wasn't afraid of being weird as well. No, he's kind of always considered to be the straight man, but I don't think they should have put Revolution 9 on the album, but I did see this sort of breakdown of it, and it's actually really structured, and it's quite sophisticated. I mean, they spent a long time on it, and there's a lot of it is Yoko. I would have had it as a sort of one-off avant-garde.
Well, it was a double album, thing. So they just put any old thing on, didn't they? There's very good things on it, but I just think you could say that that's everything they did on one album. All the possibilities are just encapsulated on that one album, including being able to write songs in a different era, the style of a different era, like Martha My Dear, which is like obviously the 30s.
Music Hall or something like that.
Yeah, Music Hall. And then there's Rocky Raccoon, which is the American influence. I also like Bungalow Bill, which used to play a lot.
I used to.
Yeah, I remember it. That's how I heard it. I used to play, and that one bit in particular. I always thought it was really funny because that was a real... I've read that's a real case. They met some American... This young lady went tiger hunting with his mother. And
that's right, yeah.
It's pretty amazing to be in a Beatles song, but they're making fun of you. They could say, they made fun of you. I met the Beatles and they're making fun of me.
In case of accidents, he always took his mum.
That's right, yeah.
He's the all-American bullet-headed Saxon mother's son. Who do you think wrote that song? Do you know?
I think it's John Lennon.
Yeah, it was John Lennon.
Because it's that sort of... He's got that mentality.
Yeah, but when you say that could be one of the silly, childish songs that he would have accused Paul McCartney of doing, in a way.
Well, possibly, I don't know.
Yeah. But no, it was John Lennon, definitely.
It's got that sharp, the cutting, the knocking down of somebody. Which Paul didn't have, really, I don't think. It wasn't really him.
No. You were saying about when you got into the band.
Well, I just... Sgt. Pepper, I remember thinking some of it was good. Some of it wasn't so good.
Yeah.
It was just a new thing for me, Everyone knows the Beatles, and we've all got our own... Everyone likes something, you like something, you don't like a bit. It's something for everyone, isn't there, really?
Yeah.
Something about... I was thinking about this. The difference between music now and then. They were writing for an LP to be played for the whole family. So when Revolver, you've got Yellow Submarine, which is the sing-along, the kids' song, which we used to see that. One of you there, we was just in the bus back from those stupid school trips that were just a waste of time. I remember seeing Yellow Submarine on the way back. Probably maybe before I knew you, endlessly.
Oh, I see.
Because it's everyone could sing it, And then you've got, what was it? Was Tomorrow Never Knows, which is the experimental one, which is on the end, which nobody would have got unless you're in.
I think what we'll do, we'll go through the songs in order and talk about them.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. Like, I think when you're a kid, you can't escape the music. But I'm pretty sure that most people say they know Beatles music, but there'd be a few gems. Stuff on the White Album, for example. I mean, would most people know? I don't know, Glass Onion.
No, they wouldn't.
Everybody's Got Something to Hide, Except Me and My Monkey.
No.
I mean,
Piggies, they wouldn't know. And that's one I think is very good. That's one of George's.
That's one of George's. Yeah.
I love that. It's a simple tune, but I like it. But
unfortunately, that was one of the ones that inspired Charles Manson. You shouldn't hold that against George, eh?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
He wanted to be in the Monkees, didn't he? And got turned down or something.
Charles Manson? Or
yeah, he did. Yeah, no, Charles Manson.
Wow.
Got turned down, and then the rest is history.
Yeah, our chum Ian, he thinks the Beatles copied the Monkees. The fact that the chronology doesn't match doesn't bother him.
Oh well, he's got a different way of looking at the world, doesn't he?
Yeah, he follows the Alan Partridge. Alan Partridge said that Wings were the band the Beatles could have been.
One of Kintyre, which is one of the first, if you like, Beatles songs I ever knew, if you want to call it that, but that was one of the first Paul McCartney songs I ever knew, obscurely, you know.
Yeah, it was Wings, wasn't it?
Yeah, Wings, yeah.
No, but I guess Ian would say that the Monkees were the band the Beatles could have been.
Right, well, Daydream Believer is a Beatles song, whichever way you look at it.
Right, yeah.
It just is, you know.
And Davy Jones was in Coronation Street.
Was he really?
But again, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. American listeners, Coronation Street, look it up on Google.
It's like Dallas.
I'll let you look
it's like an English Dallas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Slightly less glamorous. But with originally lots of northern people supping beer.
And now Nigel Havers is in it for some strange reason.
Nigel Havers is a charmer. Well, do you want to hear a useless fact? The harmonium on We Can Work It Out was the one that was played by Ina Sharples in Coronation
That's
Street.
a very good fact, actually. That's
Thank
brilliant.
you very much, yes. That was good.
So was she actually playing it on the actual song?
She played We Can Work It Out. It wasn't John Lennon at all. It was Ina.
Okay, yeah.
Ina
That's
Sharples.
fantastic, yeah.
Right, okay, Revolver. Let's talk about Revolver. So the first song is Taxman. You wanted to say something about George Harrison.
Well, he's been neglected, I think, as a songwriter. If you think he didn't write as many as Paul and John, but I think they're very good. Here Comes a Song is brilliant. Actually, the very first Beatles song I really ever knew was Something, because my mother had it. Shirley Bassey did it, and that's how I knew.
Yeah.
Didn't know it was a Beatles song, but it was George Martin who said that's one of the best love songs ever written, and he regretted.
No, that was Frank Sinatra.
Was it?
And Frank Sinatra said it was his favourite Lennon-McCartney
Is that
song.
right? Oh, there you go. That's poor George, eh?
Yeah.
Yes, he's been neglected. I like Piggies, Here Comes the Sun, Something.
Mm-hmm.
Did he do I Want to Tell You? That was one
Yeah,
of
he
the,
did, yeah, that's from Revolver.
And
yeah.
of course Taxman, which is about a multi-millionaire having to pay much more tax, but then again we all feel the same way.
What was
So
it? There's one for you, 19 for me.
One for you, 19 for me.
95% tax.
Yeah.
95%.
Well, that was then. I mean, it just shows you. I mean, that was...
But that wouldn't be 95% on the whole earnings, would it?
I think so, yeah.
So
because I can tell you a story about someone else who wasn't a Beatle, a writer called T.H. White, who had all his money taken off of him.
Yeah.
He was the man who wrote the stories that became Camelot the musical.
Mm-hmm.
He lived in a hut in Yorkshire, and he made 80,000, having earned about 2,000 a year.
Mm.
He suddenly made 80,000 on the rights, and the taxman took it all off him.
Right.
And he died prematurely.
Yeah. Well, you know Joe Lewis, the boxer?
Yeah.
He did exhibition bouts during the war
Yeah.
for free, and then the IRS got him for tax, and he
Yeah.
ended up being a greeter at Las Vegas. Terrible.
Yeah. There we go. So yes, I mean that's a comment.
Yeah.
It's funny we have about 50% tax now. I don't know what the Americans have, but it's 50%.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a good song, Taxman.
What about the solo, though? Do you know who did the solo?
No.
That was Paul.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Did this amazing... okay, we can't play it, but... no. And they used that solo for the solo for Tomorrow Never Knows. They just put it backwards and bashed it up a little bit. But no, I think George has talked about this, and I don't think he had too many songs in the early days.
No, he didn't. I Need You was one of them, wasn't it?
I Need You was one of his... Well, Don't Bother Me was one of his first ones. If you listen to that, that's on With the Beatles.
Yeah.
It's not considered to be an amazing song, but it's actually quite a progressive recording. Paul McCartney does a pretty interesting bass line, and there's some interesting percussion on it.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't have too many songs at the beginning, but on this album he actually managed to get 3 rather than his usual 2. Some of his early ones were Need You, a song called You Like Me Too Much. But Taxman, yeah, there's some good guitar on it, Paul's bass line, so that's a good one. Then we got Eleanor Rigby, one of your favourites.
Well, that's, yes, fantastic.
Last time I played From Me to You, followed by Eleanor Rigby, and again the difference, ridiculous.
Yeah.
Go on, tell me.
Well, I don't know what you can say about it. It's sinister and strange and not like anything else. Really, not like anything else in rock music, really, at all. It's just not like it. I wonder how much influence George Martin had on all that. Because it's in a medieval key. Yeah. Dorian key, I believe, is what it's called.
Should we just talk briefly about the Howard Goodall programme?
That's a very good one, yeah.
Howard Goodall, who wrote the Blackadder theme, did a series about music theory, and he did one called 20th Century Greats. It's actually on YouTube. Look up Beatles Howard Goodall and you'll find it. And what was the gist of it? That
they're going to still be around in 300 years. He actually said only Mozart was as good as them in terms of melodies. I'm not sure that's true. But that's that he was really extolling them in a way that no one else has done. And saying that they're important in the history of music, not just in rock music.
The chief weapon in their musical counter-revolution was a stunning roll call of sublime melodies that perhaps only Mozart can match in European musical history. It's no accident that Yesterday is the most recorded song of all time. It is that good. But they weren't just about catchy tunes. To appreciate fully what the Beatles did to music, we need to look at the basic building blocks of all music, melody, rhythm and harmony, and to see why it is that Western music sounds so different to the music of other cultures. A piece of Western music is instantly recognized as such because its tune is constructed from a series of notes which belong to families of notes called keys. Think of them as a palette of available colors, if you like. Since the list of available colours is in fact fairly restricted, these notes arrange themselves time and time again into familiar and attractive patterns, which composers over the centuries have discovered work well. Until the 20th century, that is, when classical composers decided to dismantle this system of agreed note patterns altogether, deliberately. They were fed up with tunes sounding predictable and familiar and thought it best to destroy the old note system completely. One result of this movement is that for the first time in history, a huge gulf opened up between music lovers and music, because audiences couldn't identify in any way with the new sound. Popular music, on the other hand, stuck to the old note system with a vengeance. Classical and popular music were drifting further and further apart, but worse was to come. Classical composers in the 1950s and 60s decided to abandon not just the note system, but every other recognisable feature of Western music, declaring that any sound, such as the rubbing of sandpaper, could be described as music. All of the activities you see here were put on as actual musical performances, no kidding. But it wasn't as if there was no method at all in this madness. Often the only way to see or hear things afresh is to do away with the old and traditional. But audiences, in their masses, didn't get the new sounds and concepts. They held on stubbornly to the familiar inherited forms. For their part, the musical avant-garde celebrated their unpopularity. A dreadful impasse emerged. Classical music as a living, communicative language had, to all intents and purposes, ground to a halt. So by the time the Beatles arrived on the scene, practically the only new music anyone wanted to listen to was popular music.
Well, if you feel it and like it, go get your lover, then reel and rock it. Oh,
But pop music in the 1950s, whilst often catchy, had its limitations too. It was formulaic, recycling the same few chords, song structures and rhythms again and again. Nothing that precedes the Beatles gives any clue as to the startling transformation they were about to set in motion. But it always sounded like the Beatles. The sheer variety and wealth of style inherent in their music is one reason why they are much more than just another 60s pop band. Their ability to absorb influences can be seen clearly in one of their greatest songs. In 1966, they released a track that was different from any pop song anyone had heard before. This song was Eleanor Rigby, and nothing shows more dramatically how their style as composers was developing. The song is beautiful and sinister at the same time. What's happening inside this music to produce so chilling and moving an effect on us? Why is it so different from everything else that was going on in 1966? Well, for a start, it's not in a conventional key. If it were, it would sound like this. Eleanor Rigby picks up the rice in the church where a wedding has been. As it is, it actually sounds like this. Eleanor Rigby picks up the rice in the church where a wedding has been. The subtle difference between those two melodies, the raising of the sixth, the semitone, gives away the fact that Eleanor Rigby is in what's called a mode. Modes preceded the major and minor keys that were introduced into Western music during the Renaissance. Like keys, each mode has its own particular flavour and texture. They began in ancient Greece and still have Greek names, and they're hardwired into the folk music of many cultures. Scarborough Fair is in the Dorian mode, the most common minor mode in all Anglo-Celtic folk music. It has a moody, melancholic atmosphere about it.
Yeah, well, there was one guy, it was William Mann in the Times, at the end of 1963, and 63, they weren't playing what we consider sophisticated music, started talking about Aeolian cadences, and, I can't remember, lots of musical sort of hyperbole, and John Lennon said that he thought Aeolian cadences sounded like exotic birds.
But he looked into it. I mean,
Dorian scales. And
the Dorian is what it's in, yes. I mean, I've looked at these scales. You can tell when you hear church music that it sounds churchy, and it's because it's different. It's a different combination of black and white notes. That's all.
Yeah,
it predated major and minor.
Yeah, that's it.
I've tried to write something in the Dorian key. It's just strange. The question is, did Paul McCartney instinctively hear church music and then play like that, or was he told about it, or did he?
Well, I think that you have to think that it gets buried in your subconscious, especially when you're a kid. You absorb things so easily when you're a kid, like learning languages, for example, and it doesn't happen so consciously. It just goes in there, and then I guess when you're songwriting, and I was explaining to you earlier, if you're on the piano and you play like a major chord, if you move one of your fingers to a strange note, then suddenly you've got a chord which would be like a diminished or an added fifth or something like that. Yeah. And it sort of becomes very sophisticated, but it could be just that you've moved one finger.
Yeah.
And I've studied sort of John Lennon's songs a little bit, and he's a lazy person. Like he would never denied that himself. So he would tend to let composing a song on the piano, and he lets his fingers wander, and you end up with these really funny chords. But I don't think it's really conscious. I think. I mean, Paul McCartney got the melody just from the piano, which is not really.
It's not that. No, it doesn't have a great range.
No, it's not. But I think it just happens really, and I'm guessing that. Well, I know that George Martin would have done the string arrangement.
But it's a strange lyric as well. It's not like anything else in popular music. Not. All the lonely people, where do they all come from?
Yeah.
It's funny how some popular culture can become like what's called high culture just for the quality of the people doing it.
That's right, yeah.
Because I do think, the Beatles are one of the geniuses of pop culture, like Dickens, but they become sophisticated, not because they intended to be, because they're just so good.
And Tim Brooke Taylor, don't forget.
Tim Brooke Taylor, now, do the American...
No.
Well, you can look up the goodies.
Look up the goodies.
Funky Gibbon is a very interesting...
American listeners.
I once saw him in the supermarket. That was, yeah.
He might be listening to this.
Who knows? Who knows who is? I mean, it could be anyone.
To the world.
Royalty could be listening, possibly. Who knows?
Well, talking of royalty, maybe YouTube are listening. waiting to see if I start humming Beatles songs.
When you may get banned.
So they can get me for copyrights and have me shot.
Right.
Anyway, it's like a story of a lonely woman, like...
Yeah, but there are such people out there. There's more than we realise.
There's plenty of lonely people, yeah.
Was it based on anything that Paul had known? Apparently the lyric was going to be Father McCartney, but he changed it.
That's right,
he thought people would think it was his dad or something.
Yeah, that's
But it wasn't based on anyone he knew, or any case he knew, just something he just imagined.
And do you know the story about the gravestone? I don't know if you know, John Lennon and Paul McCartney met at a garden fete.
I've heard of that. It was a church, wasn't it, or something?
Church fete, Church fete, St. Peter's Church in Liverpool. And years later, they discovered that there's a gravestone with the Rigby family, including Eleanor.
Well, that's amazing.
Now, Scenario A, Paul knew that and didn't tell anyone. Scenario B, it just sort of stuck in his head. Scenario C, it's a complete coincidence. But I did hear a story. I mean, if you think about it, kids who belong to a church, it's not unknown for them to start reading gravestones. I mean, I remember I used to wait. I used to have to wait for this bus to take me to school in Egham, and we had about sort of 20-minute wait, and we used to read the gravestones. I don't know, it's just something kids do, I think. So personally, I think it just kind of went into his head. But apparently Eleanor came from Eleanor Bron, who was in Help with them, and Rigby came from a shop called Rigby's that he passed sometimes. But
that's what he said. That's an extraordinary coincidence, but these things happen, they do. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Talk about extraordinary coincidences.
Yes.
It not necessarily makes you depressed, but it kind of trips you back to your childhood. I mean, that happens a lot, and you get this feeling like he sings, when I was a boy, everything was right, which, wasn't necessarily true if you take his history, but it kind of brings you back to childhood, and that is a deep song, yeah.
That was one of John Cale's Desert Island discs. I'm a big Cale fan, so I just wanted to say
John Cale from the Beatles?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful guy.
Yeah, he's an artist.
Much neglected. So, yeah, that's true, yeah.
I'm Only Sleeping, yeah. Backwards guitar, which they'd originally used on Rain, which was a B-side that came out a few months before Revolver. I'm Only Sleeping. Then you got Love You Too, so we're back to George again. And this is all Indian instruments. The other Beatles weren't on it. Again, pretty revolutionary.
Yeah.
First all Indian song.
One question I've got is, obviously John and Paul were the big guys in songwriting, but how did George slip his music? I mean, was there a sort of, no rivalry, but, did he have to fight to get his music on?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
And George Martin has said lots of times he didn't help him, like he wasn't really interested.
Right, yes.
And they used to just tolerate George's songs, which is, is a bit rough. But, and all these things, the reality's kind of harder, and probably we always think that things just run smoothly, but I don't think making records or making films is a smooth process. Sure, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on.
Yeah.
As I said, I don't think he had too many songs at the beginning, but I know it's tough, when you write a song, presenting it to the rest of your bandmates, because you're really putting it out there.
Yeah.
I suppose Taxman might have been easier, because
that was the most
comment about a song.
Yeah, it was,
it's
and
external. It's not
also
George's
the most
personal.
like the other John and Paul's songs, I think. Really. Taxman, I think so. It's more like what they would do,
right?
I think. Within You, Without You is something else. I don't know. That's just.
I really like that song. Actually.
Yeah.
Have you heard that mashup of Within You, Without You and Tomorrow Never Knows?
No. Oh, have I? Right. I don't have it. Yes, I have it.
You know the Love album that came out?
Yeah.
Cirque du Soleil. Yeah, they made some good mixes of that. Yeah, so Love You Too, all Indian. Indian music's quite interesting because it's all on one chord. You don't really change chord.
Yeah.
And Tomorrow Never Knows is all on one chord. I think it's C. And introducing the drone idea into Western music was a big thing.
Yes.
But do you know the story of how George Harrison first got interested in Indian music?
Oh, what I know is that he wanted to buy a sitar, and they got to India thinking that there wasn't going to be any interest in them, not in India, and there was the same thing.
People were shouting,
yes,
Beatles.
Right, yeah. They realised it was everywhere. Pretty daunting, I think, that.
It was actually a bit earlier than that, because when they were making Help, there's a scene in an Indian restaurant, and George would have heard the sitar for the first time then. And again, he didn't make a big thing of it, but when they did Norwegian Wood, which was Rubber Soul, the end of 65, it just needed something for the riff. Got this sitar, and it worked well, yeah. And then when they were coming back from the Philippines, which I talked about last time...
They upset people in the Philippines. Is it Japan or somewhere?
It was actually Japan, the Philippines and America. They had a disastrous tour of 66. No, in the Philippines, basically, they didn't turn up for reception with Madame Marcos.
Right.
Her of the shoes.
Yes,
yeah, we know. To our Philippine list. Okay, whatever. Yeah, they came back from the Philippines and they stopped off in India. Yeah, and George bought a sitar. And then I think the Byrds, David Crosby, I think, and McGuinn, got him onto Ravi Shankar.
Right.
But a lot of people say, did the Beatles create all these things, these new things? And I think what most people would say, including Paul McCartney, they picked up on things, but then they reflected them back. Paul McCartney always said that when they left Liverpool, they had the idea that it was like telling their mates from Liverpool what was going on in the rest of the world. Do you know what I mean? By using their music.
Right, yeah.
They're saying, oh, Indian music's good, we're going to use it, and this is, just so you can see what's going on. And because I think what it comes down to is that they had this way of experimenting, but then they were tuneful. Even stuff, okay, I Am the Walrus is not particularly tuneful, okay. But Paul's stuff, however experimental it is, it's always got good tunes to back it. And it's always got interesting chords and everything. And it's sort of that mixture of melody and harmony was always good. And that's what will live on. That's why the music is going to be listened to in 300 years. Because when you've got a good song, you can get like Shirley Bassey to do it, or Ella Fitzgerald, or William Shatner. But again, that's another story.
That's a good one. We're going to talk about that.
Picture yourself
on the boat,
in a boat on a river.
Tangerine trees
and marmalade skies. Somebody calls you, you answer quite slowly. A girl with kaleidoscope eyes.
Yeah, Captain Kirk.
You can talk to him on Facebook, actually. You can actually talk to him literally. I mean, he's that accommodating, he'll talk to you.
Yeah, that's good, yeah. You can tweet people nowadays. God, I lost my train of thought again.
Well, we're only up to track 3. We've got to get to track 4.
Are we still talking about Timbuktu? No, we're not. Timbuktu.
No.
Okay. So they would pick up influences, and then they put Indian music in their songs, but because their songs are still tuneful and commercial, it makes people interested in sitars.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, that's right, yes.
If you make an album if you listen to Ravi Shankar, to me, unless you're really into it, it's quite tough to listen to, because it doesn't really have a tune you can hang it on.
Right.
Whereas,
I don't know what people would have made of it in 1967. I mean, I wonder how many...
He played at Monterey, didn't he?
Right, yeah.
In between all these pop acts.
I wonder how many of the Beatles fans didn't like the way they went from 63 to...
Yeah, I think they would have lost a few people, but Sgt. Pepper still sold an incredible amount, so they must have got a few new fans. Right, Love You Too is the next one. Here, There and Everywhere.
Yeah.
Can't really argue with that, I don't think.
No.
It's a pretty beautiful love song.
Who was that?
Asher. That's Paul.
Oh, Paul, yes, of course. Well, he went off with someone else, didn't he? I don't know.
But they were together for a long time.
Well, they were, yeah.
4 years, 5 years.
Okay. But she didn't marry him.
No.
I think that's what he wanted.
No, she did catch him in bed with somebody else.
Oh, is that right? With the sheepdog?
No, the sheepdog. It's Woody Allen, everybody. Everything you always want to know about sex, but are afraid to ask.
Yes.
Gene Wilder and the sheep. No, there was no sheepdog involved. It's quite conventional, but it's got great chords, great melody. I think it's like the quintessential. I can't imagine that would ever not be considered a great song.
Yeah.
Yellow Submarine.
Well, that's everyone can sing it.
Everyone can sing it.
Good song.
If it was me, I would take it off Revolver, stick it on a B-side of Eleanor Rigby instead of a double A-side, and maybe put Rain, which was, came out a few months earlier.
No, because I think they needed something for the whole family, and this is something that's been lost, this idea of everyone listening to one album.
But then the trouble with that is that, I don't know, it depends how serious you want to be taken, because, a serious rock fan would probably like everything on Revolver except Yellow Submarine, perhaps. I know what you mean. I mean, that's the difference in the Beatles and the Stones.
Yeah, that's right.
The Stones didn't have anything for the family,
No, they didn't. But the Beatles did, so that was a good thing in a way.
Remember, the Beatles were a hard rock band, though, Hamburg.
Yeah.
But I think, as time goes on, I think Paul becomes more and more significant musically, because you sort of start to realise that, let's face it, John Lennon's been sainted since he died. And that tends to happen, that people die. We all know that. They get seen in a different light because you're not going to hear from them anymore. That's not being cynical. I think John Lennon actually said death is the greatest marketing tool of all. And it sounds like something he would say, but he wasn't afraid to make those kind of statements. Yeah, so I think Paul wrote Yellow Submarine. There's some great sound effects. On YouTube now, I don't know if you've seen, you can hear like isolated tracks. Have you heard any of that? So you can hear, there's a take of Yellow Submarine with just the vocals and then all the sound effects in the background. And it's quite interesting. It looks like they're having fun.
Yeah.
In Abbey Road, they had a big cupboard full of random instruments. And they said, Beatles have said lots of times that was really helpful. They had all these weird instruments like just strange keyboards and things like that. Kazoo.
Well, there's the Mellotron, but I think...
Yeah, I think the Mellotron actually was developed at the
There's
time.
only 20 of those left in the world, apparently. One of them's in Saint Hill, which is the Scientologist place in East Grinstead.
I think one of them's at the Beatles story in Albert Dock.
Well, it probably is, yeah. There's only 20 of them there.
That was a strange instrument. But, they used all kinds of these weird instruments, and the outtake of Yellow Submarine's quite interesting. Ringo generally had a song to sing on each one. He didn't start writing until Don't Pass Me By on the White Album.
Mm-hmm.
It actually took him 4 years to write. Because
it wasn't really worth the wait, I don't think. Sorry, Ringo, if you're listening.
Yeah, Ringo. And Barbara Bach, if you
Ringo's
wife,
wife.
You're listening, Edmund doesn't like Spy Who Loved Me, which is
I like her in it. I like her. She's the best thing in it.
It's a scandalous statement, let's face it. Richard Keel as Jaws, brilliant villain. Yeah.
He's the most unbelievable villain you've ever imagined.
Oh, it's brilliant though, steel teeth.
And then he turns into a good guy at the end.
Yeah, and he falls in love.
Moonraker.
Well, here's to us.
Yes.
He gets a line, yeah.
That wasn't in Ian Fleming's books at all, was it?
No, I don't think Ian Fleming had anything to do with that. Well, was anything from about the last 10 films anything to do
No,
with
probably not. Anthony Burgess did a screenplay of Spy Who Loved Me, which has never been done, the actual novel.
Wow. Who wrote You Only Live Twice?
Oh, that's Roald Dahl, yeah.
Roald Dahl,
really odd. But he wanted to be a big adult writer and had to be a children's writer.
Is there any connection between Roald Dahl and the Beatles?
It probably is. You're going to tell me there is.
No, I don't know.
Oh, there isn't, no. Probably, I don't know.
Anyone listening? Roald Dahl and the Beatles? Anything? Roald Dahl wrote a book called Boy, and the Beatles were all boys.
Right, okay, that's fair enough.
It. And they did a song called Boys.
Roald Dahl
Don't you know I mean boys?
Roald Dahl was Norwegian, and they did Norwegian wood.
Oh, there you go.
Did they ever go to Norway?
That's very clever. You can find a link to anything. Did they ever go to Norway? No, I don't think they ever toured Scandinavia or Russia. Okay, that's Yellow Submarine. She said, one of my favourites.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's not on that one. It's one of the only Beatles songs he's not on. I think George plays the bass.
Was there a reason for that?
I think they had a row. It was the last one they recorded, and Paul's not on it.
Okay.
Again, has that kind of acid sound. Great guitar. You can hear isolate. If you look, she said isolated guitars. You can hear just the guitars together. It's pretty awesome. And Ringo does these amazing backwards fills. Ringo's left-handed and played right-handed. Like most drums, I guess if you have the hi-hat on the left, it's a right-handed kit. And he plays these funny backward fills. You can hear the isolated drums as well. It's because of Rock Band, the computer game. They've isolated all the tracks, and you can hear them isolated.
Mm.
For me, it's like opened up a whole new world. Like you can hear all these bits that you can't hear on the records. I think it's amazing. I think he was an eccentric drummer, and the Beatles were an eccentric band.
But was he a bad drummer really, or was he actually much better than
if you ask Jim Keltner or Phil Collins, if you want to ask Phil Collins, he would say he's a good drummer. I mean, there's a few songs where he sort of sounds a bit like he's whacking it pretty hard. He wasn't a very subtle drummer, but he was eccentric. And as I said, I think the Beatles were an eccentric band. Anything went. And I just think his drumming was very appropriate for their music. Hard to imagine without it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Good Day Sunshine. On the vinyl, this would have been the side 2, Good Day Sunshine. Mm-hmm. I think influenced by the Loving Spoonful. Do you know that band?
I do, yes.
Yeah, sort of mid-60s California band. Again, fairly typical of Paul, or can't really imagine John or George writing that song. Barrelhouse Piano by George Martin, the solos by George Martin. Fairly conventional, there's some good harmonies. They were well into their harmonies. They liked the Beach Boys and Loving Spoonful and the Byrds.
And the Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, the intro is from a Beach Boys, or it's inspired by. I think wouldn't be nice. Just the beginning of it.
Oh, yeah, the organ, yeah.
It's changed so much that it's not plagiarism.
Well, as I was talking to you earlier, there's a presentation by, I think his name's Kirby Ferguson, called Everything is a Remix. And it's about how everything comes from something else. So it's not necessarily plagiarism unless it's really obvious. Unless you're talking about Led Zeppelin's first album. And then
yes, we don't want to talk about that, though.
Not crediting anyone.
Because somebody may sue you for suggesting.
Yeah, maybe if
they nicked all their stuff from elsewhere.
If I hum one of their songs, I wonder whether they'll sue me or the person who originally wrote it will sue me.
That's right, yes.
There's a question. Any lawyers listening, you can answer that for me.
The great trick is to copy stuff from people music from another time that people don't know about.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't know anything about that song.
Have you heard the Noel Coward version of Rehab by Amy Winehouse?
No, I've not. No.
I don't think it's on there anymore, but it's fantastic. Someone's done it was actually before she died. It wasn't connected with the fact she died, but someone's done a Noel Coward 1920s version of Rehab.
Oh, is that right?
As if that was the original and Amy
Right.
Winehouse had covered it. Yeah, they weren't claiming it was just a joke.
They tried to make me go to rehab, but I said no, no, no. Yes, I've been back, but when I'm back, then you'll know, no, no. I really haven't got the time, my dears, and if my daddy thinks I'm fine, they tried to make me go to rehab, but I won't go, go, go. Only lucky to get me to go anywhere, dears, with my hips.
Mike Flowers brought out Wonderwall
So I remember that.
at the same time that Oasis did, as a joke to make it seem like they'd taken this song. Wonderwall is actually the name of a film that George Harrison did the music for.
Oh, yeah. Well, he did his own electronic album, which has disappeared,
Oh,
hasn't
it's
it?
horrible.
Is it really? I guess that. Because it's not available anymore. It must be bad.
Well, it's on Zapple, which had Two Virgins and Life with the Lions and all John and Yoko's stuff. It's pretty hard to listen to, and that's coming from me. And I like most of what all of them did, really, and that's tough to listen to. Okay, And Your Bird Can Sing. That's got quite a weird scale on it, and there's a sort of dual guitar. I think it's Paul and George. It's a good song. I mean, it's supposed to be apparently something to do with Brian Epstein as well. I think And Your Bird Can Sing's like saying, you seem to be very impressive, but you can't get me, you know. Tell me you got everything you want, but you can't get me. It's like there's always something missing. That's how I interpret it. I remember reading something about this song. They said John Lennon had this amazing ability to sound vulnerable and self-assured at the same time. And I was telling you, I've just been reading this book called Living on Borrowed Time, and it's written by Fred Seaman, who worked for him in the last couple of years of his life. And he said he was just an extraordinary character because he was always two things at the same time. You know, and I guess a lot of those people become famous. You know, sort of comedians. I think John Lennon had almost the personality of a comedian. Really. I mean, he was a comedian in one sense, not a professional comedian, obviously. But, right, so we got For No One. Do you want to talk about For No One?
Well, that's one of my favourite songs. Well, I heard that. I don't know where I heard it, but it was one of my first Beatles songs with something that I really, really liked. Not hardly anything about them. I don't know what that was. Why I heard it, and it still is actually one of my favourite songs.
It's Paul McCartney again.
It's always it's going down. I wonder if one of those is. Do you think all great music is descending? Music's either going up or going down, and all great music is descending because that is descending.
Well, yeah, but one of the tricks they had, which was to make the chords go down and the melody go up, and the other way around.
All right, okay, that's interesting.
It's an interesting song because it's got a jaunty rhythm, but it's actually quite dark.
Right.
You know, it's quite downbeat. Yeah, but yeah, it's got like the bass going down. Yeah, you're right. But it's got quite a lilting melody, which is quite a nice melody. I think one of the things, if you can write a dark song with a nice melody, it's quite powerful. Because again, you've got these two things at the same time. I think that appeals to people. You know, they're kind of people who appeal to people in general, when it's not such an obvious thing. I think that's about Jane Asher as well.
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. But it's about a relationship that's finished.
Yeah.
Ending or run out of...
And of course they were together, so I suppose Paul tended to not write directly about himself. He tended to sort of put things in the third person, so to speak. Yeah.
That's one of their best, I think.
I'll definitely stand the test of time. Dr. Robert. Dr. Robert's about a doctor. I think he was called Dr. Roberts. And he used to give drugs to musicians.
You mean real drugs, not
pharmaceuticals.
No, right, yes, right.
Pharmaceuticals. Not aspirin or anything.
No. Was he American or?
Yeah, he's American.
I thought he would be.
Yeah. Again, it's got that Revolver sound. The bit when they're well, you're feeling fine. It's got again a bit of that Beach Boys, Birds thing. It's got some really nice harmonies. But yeah, it's mainly quite a conventional song, really. One of the more conventional ones of this album. And then you got I Want to Tell You.
Yes.
Which is George again.
Yeah.
This song is about not being able... It's about inarticulacy. It's about not being able to tell somebody what you're really thinking. I want to tell you my head is filled with things to say. When you're here, all my words, they seem to slip away.
Right.
There's some pretty cool high harmony vocalising from Paul. There's a kind of criticism of Paul McCartney. I'm not saying I agree with this, if anyone, Paul, if you're listening.
Pretty vain if Paul's listening to this, but...
He's very experimental on other people's records. So if you listen to Something, that bass line is kind of playing its own song. It's a good bass line, but it's playing its own song. And he tended to... I'm trying to think of some examples. I can't think of any examples at the moment, but... I mean, like Rain.
Yeah.
Do you know the song Rain?
Yes.
Like Ringo's doing drum fills all the way through it, and Paul's playing this very experimental bass line, which is a great bass line, that's the thing. But, yeah, that's one of the criticisms about him. But anyway.
Well, yeah, that's fine.
Right,
You
got
can
to
live
get
with
you
that, I'm
into
sure.
Yeah, I'm sure you can deal with that. Got to Get You Into My Life. One of my favourites.
All right, well, it begins like, I don't know, like a kind of Tony Bennett crooner thing.
Well, there you
and
go.
then it's got a really... Yeah, go on. Yeah.
That's Paul's upbringing, isn't it? It's great. You know, you can make a really hip song with something like that in it.
I just don't like the chorus. I just think it's really boring. That's just me.
Okay.
But it, that's all.
But there's some pretty cool brass. Apparently it's a song about pot, because he hadn't taken LSD, all the other three had taken LSD by that time. And it's about pot, because they all liked a bit of that.
They used to do it in the toilets because George didn't approve or something, that's what I heard.
George Martin, yeah. There's also another story that they used to put amphetamines in George Martin's drink, because they used to have all-night recording sessions, so to keep him up.
Well, as long as it wasn't anything else, I think that's all right, and it was done for an honest reason.
Yeah, practical reason.
How much George is responsible?
George Martin?
Yes, as the fifth Beatle, because I think he hasn't been given the credit. Perhaps.
No, maybe not, no. And they got kind of upset, because apparently... A couple of times he credited himself for a few things, and then some of the band got upset. But no, I mean, just to give you a couple of examples. Like he used to write scores for their music. So "I Am the Walrus," is his score. "Strawberry Fields" is his score. I think one of the differences with John and Paul is Paul will have an idea of what the score was going to be, and he would whistle the melody, and George Martin would write it out. Whereas John Lennon would say something like. For the benefit, Mr. Kite, I want to smell the sawdust, make it happen, you know. I want to sound like the Dalai Lama chanting from a hilltop, for Tomorrow Never Knows, and George Martin had to sort of translate it. No, I think he had a very big contribution. Yeah, it's not true, apparently they smoked to join in the Buckingham Palace toilets when they got their MBEs.
Oh, is that right, yeah?
John Lennon said they did, but George Harrison said they smoked a cigarette.
Wonder what Her Majesty... Is that what they wrote Her Majesty? Your Majesty on it, I don't know.
McCartney wrote it, yeah. It's quite risque if you think about it. She doesn't have a lot to say. I want to tell her I love her a lot, but I got to get a belly full of wine. And then finally, Tomorrow Never Knows.
Well, that seems, for me, it's all the dance music that's happened since, all the house music of 1990 and onwards. It all goes back to... Yeah. And that's one of my favourite tracks on the album.
Oh, I think it's amazing.
It is, yeah.
Again, there's an early version, I think it was called Mark 1. It's quite different. I think what happened was they took this sort of Indian idea of one chord, which is pretty unusual. So the whole song was one chord.
No.
I think they only had 3 verses. And the song was too short, so they thought, what can we do with it? And then Paul was making all these tape loops. And the famous one, which sounds like a seagull, which you can always hear, it comes up near the beginning, is him laughing. I think you just literally cut up tape and stick it back together and you create this loop. I mean, it's an amazing record. A good song to listen to, actually, would be the one Let Forever Be, which is Chemical Brothers and Noel Gallagher.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to that, I mean, that's a hip 90s song, and that's very Tomorrow Never Knows. And I think Noel Gallagher actually covered Tomorrow Never Knows.
Mm-hmm.
Not on an Oasis record, but on another record. Or in a live show, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, that's 1966, and Danny Baker played it on his radio show, and I think it was like 35 years after it was made, and he said it still sounds like it's 35 years in the future.
That's right, yeah, that's true. Yes.
And that was the first song made for Revolver, actually. Again, like taking Eastern religion, taking the effects of LSD, taking tape loops.
And there's a piano on it that sounds like a Victorian.
Yeah, there's a sort of jaunty little piano.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, there's something I was thinking about. Three of the most sinister Beatles songs, you could say, or I don't know if sinister is the word. Tomorrow Never Knows, Strawberry Fields Forever, and Revolution 9.
Yeah.
They all have something quite disturbing about them. They all end with a jaunty piano at the end.
Mm-hmm.
All those three songs. So that's the end of Revolver. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Well, there's like 6 or 7 other albums, but we haven't really got the time, have we, really? Well, I know that Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, the opening, you could sit for 2 weeks at the piano just playing it randomly, and you'd never come up with that combination of notes.
But again, it's got the descending it's got that descending bass. Strawberry Fields Forever, the beginning of that's got this descending bass as well, which we were talking about earlier. But yeah, it's sort of simple but hard to come up with. I think that's the key, isn't it?
But it does seem to me to be completely original.
Theoretically, we could have all written The Office, right? Or anyone who's worked in an office could have written The Office.
Right, yeah.
It hasn't got anything that you couldn't have thought of, but then we didn't write it. Ricky Gervais and Stephen Martin.
But The Office isn't going to last as long as the Beatles, you know. I don't think so. Ricky Gervais is yesterday's man even now.
Oh dear.
And he was a pop star for a while, I believe. He was a new romantic, but didn't make it as...
He was, early 80s.
Right.
Last recording I did, I was talking about this new biography. Right, Mark Lewisohn, who is the number one Beatles expert.
Do we know he's the number one expert? Then maybe someone else somewhere else?
It's not like a world ranking or anything, but he's renowned as a... He's almost got a full-time job researching the Beatles, and he's spent 10 years already on this new biography called All Those Years. And the first volume has come out, and it's 1,000 pages, and there's an author's cut which is 2,000 pages. 2,000 pages, and that's only part 1 of 3. And he's promising this is going to be the biography they deserve. And I think he read every edition of the Liverpool Evening Paper from about 1940 to about the mid-60s, something like that, to get a flavour of Liverpool.
And why it is that they tried so hard to get out.
Oh dear.
I'm
there was that
saying.
joke, they named Liverpool Airport John Lennon Airport, because that was the first place he went to as soon as he got famous. Yeah, and he, the first volume was called Tune In. I said last time that Beatles fans have already worked out the other two are going to be called Turn On and Drop Out, but apparently they're not.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Right. He's mainly written reference books, but now he's written a biography. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's...
so he's interviewed lots of people, everyone who knew him?
Yep. Yeah, he has, yeah.
Nice, okay. Well...
Right. Any final thoughts?
Well, I think Day in the Life was the
Amazing,
best.
Yeah.
And nothing was written like that in popular music before. That's the only one that they approached actual classical music, I think, and you could extend it to 15 minutes. Just do a 15-minute instrumental piece just on that. And there's Long and Winding Road. I mean, I don't think Revolver's got everything that's the best, but it may be the best album.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that even, but it tends to be
things seem to go in cycles and trends. Like, it seems to have been decided now that Vertigo is like the best film ever.
No,
top Citizen Kane, but I mean, according to who?
yeah, doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I watched it recently. It's pretty good, but I prefer Rear Window, perhaps. I like Rope as well.
Did Hitchcock ever meet the Beatles?
I don't think so.
Noel Coward called the Millman a little shit.
He died in the same year as...
That's true, he did, yes. But have taken away his star.
Noel Coward called who?
Noel Coward called the Beatles ill-mannered little shits in his diaries. It's actually in there. But there we are. That's just his view, of course.
Yeah. If you want to read acerbic diaries, everybody, you've always got Kenneth Williams.
Well, I don't know what he thought about the Beatles. Probably didn't think much.
He makes a couple of references to it, but not much.
No.
What were you talking about? Day in the Life? Yeah. I think it is the perfect fusion of John and Paul as well.
That was both of them together, was it?
Yeah, they didn't write it together, but there's John's section is obviously I read the News Surveyor Boy, and then Paul's section is about getting on the bus in Liverpool. And I think the juxtaposition of the two is perfect. Yeah, I was listening to Sgt. Pepper. I know you're not a huge fan.
It's alright, yeah. You know.
Last year was the 45th anniversary, and I decided on June the 1st I was going to listen to it with an open mind, forget everything I'd done before, and listen to it. And I listened to the original mono, and it's quite different to the stereo. Like Lucy in the Skies is much more phasey effect on it. It sounds much more psychedelic. I thought the best songs were, when I listened to it again, She's Leaving Home.
That's a very good song, actually, the intro.
Fantastic. Within You Without You, I know it's not that popular, but I like it. It sounds more modern, and I love this drone idea. It's great. And when I listened to Day in the Life, it actually made the whole album seem like a journey. Even though it's not really a concept album. You've got Sgt. Pepper, Billy Shears, with a little help from my friends, and then loads of other songs which have nothing to do with Pepper, and then you get back to Sgt. Pepper Reprise, and then you've got Day in the Life. But Day in the Life's so good that it, in a way, it validates the whole Sgt. Pepper idea. I would put that as one of their best.
Right.
Sure.
Well, yes, that's it. Not really. Long and Winding Road, I like. Yeah, I just really, really love that one. It should be a bigger piece than what it is.
Well, I think it's sort of got trumped by Let It Be, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's just another song, really.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Right, I think we're going to quit while we're ahead. I hope you enjoyed this rambling discussion of Revolver and various other things. And see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Saying, you know, I'd give you everything I've got for a little peace of mind. I'd give you everything I've got for a little peace of mind. I'd give you everything I've got for a little peace of mind. I'd give you everything I've got for a little peace of mind. I'd give you everything I've got for a little peace of mind.
So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to Edmund for doing that back in 2013. And in fact, weirdly enough, he rung me last night while I was editing this. So a bit of serendipity there. And my washing's done, by the way, in case you're wondering. I'm just referring to that sound that came on the recording towards the end. Some kind of washing or air conditioner or something. But no, it was just the hiss on the very primitive equipment I was using back then. Thanks also to the people who sent the questions in. Some of whom I'm still in touch with. One, in fact, who has passed away at a ridiculously young age. So just remember how precious life is and how fragile it is. And make the most of your friends and your family. Don't always follow that advice myself, but I know it's good advice. I just wanted to talk about Tune In. So, as you heard earlier, I was convinced that the next two volumes of the three-parter, Mark Lewison's three-parter, were going to be Turn On and Drop Out. And that's definitely not the case. He's made that clear. But it was the beginning of 2014, so just a few months after I recorded the episode you just heard, I decided to get Tune In, the extended version, I was going to say at the beginning, if there's any factual errors in this, please don't write to me, because I knew quite a lot about the Beatles then, but as I said earlier, it's all escalated. So, a few factual errors, don't get too worried about it. So I think the official version of Tune In was 900 pages, and then the author's cut was 17 or 1800. But what's a couple of hundred pages between friends, especially with a tome like that. But yes, at the beginning of 2014, when I first moved to Spain, I got it on Kindle, the deluxe author's cut version. And I spent a glorious 3 months just reading a certain number of pages every day, just pacing myself. And I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to read that one twice. No offence, Mark. I'll happily read the 900-page version more than once, which I then bought. But I thought this will be probably the one and only time for the author's cut. So I made notes as well while I was reading. And it was just a wonderful journey with Mark Lewisohn and the Beatles. And I realised there was plenty I didn't know. And as I said earlier, now that's just been magnified. And now, because I'm so busy creating my own podcast, I don't really listen too much to the other guys, which is no offence to them. It's just a case of dividing your time. And, I have been suffering from Beatles overload in especially the last year or so. It's just everywhere you turn, they're just there. And much as I love them, and much as I loved Get Back, which was a wonderful new addition, massive new addition to the canon of Beatles documentaries and books and podcasts, there are other things in life. So I don't really worry nowadays if there's facts that I don't know. It doesn't bug me at all. Whereas back in 2013, it probably did, in fact. Just wanted to tell you what was in the show notes. So Everything is a Remix, which is that Kirby Ferguson film. Highly recommended. Very, very inspirational for creative people. And I'll put the YouTube version of Edmund and I's talk, just in case you want to hear the uncut version. Although, to be honest, the cut version with sound clips was much better. But anyway, it's there. And I'll put a link or two of Howard Goodall's Beatles programs as well. And finally, the Fab Four Free For All podcast, if I can find it on their website, with Mark Lewisohn from 2013. Just in case you haven't read Tune In, how could you not have read it? I'm only kidding. Nothing is obligatory, even that book. Even Get Back, it's not obligatory, you don't have to watch it, but I would highly recommend it, and I'd highly recommend Tune In, so I'll find that. And finally, just to tell you what the next episode will be, and in fact I mentioned it at the end of bonus episode 10, the US versus John Lennon with James Corbett. The video version is out there on YouTube, but I'll edit the conversation up and I'll add some sound clips, as is traditional, make it different. So that's it. Thank you as ever for listening. There'll be one more podcast before Christmas, so I will end that one with some kind of Christmassy message and maybe a Christmas song. Who knows? So all the best, take care, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye. If you'd like to support my work across my 3 podcasts, which are Glass Onion on John Lennon, Life and Life Only, and Film Gold, go to buymeacoffee.com/Antony Rotuno, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly or yearly subscription, which will give you early access, bonus podcast content, and extracts from the upcoming book based on the Glass Onion podcast. Thanks again for listening.